Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneDrop, created for people with diabetes by people who have diabetes. By Gvoke HypoPen, the first premixed auto-injector for very low blood sugar. And by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
This week, there's a new movie all about a big global disaster, and it features a main character with type 1. Award-winning screenwriter Chris Sparling had never put diabetes into one of his movies, and he was a bit concerned about how it would all turn out.
I became so, in a way, overprotective of getting it right and it being portrayed right, because the last thing I wanted to do was to finally incorporate diabetes into a movie of mine and for it to end up being portrayed wrong.
Many of you already know Chris, sort of. His wife, Kerri Sparling, wrote the very popular blog SixUntilMe for almost 15 years. We talk about diabetes in the movie and at home, and about the entertainment business during this time of COVID. In Innovations, JDRF begins at-home early T1D detection. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am so glad to have you here. I am your host, Stacey Simms, and we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes by sharing stories of connection. Something different this week, we're going to talk about Greenland. This is a new movie. It's releasing in the U.S. on video on demand. It stars Gerard Butler and Morena Baccarin, who you probably know from the Deadpool movies. I put the trailer in the Facebook group, in Diabetes Connections, the group. But the basic plot is that these are estranged parents. Maybe they'll get back together, but they are working on their marriage just as a world-ending cosmic disaster happens. And wouldn't you know it, their son has type 1 diabetes. So diabetes, type 1, insulin, this all becomes a plot point. Now, we've talked about this a lot before. So many films and TV shows have gotten diabetes exactly wrong. But Greenland has a big advantage, and that is, as you heard in that opening tease, and that's screenwriter Chris Sparling, whose wife lives with type 1. We will get to Chris in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneDrop. And getting diabetes supplies is a pain. Not only the ordering and the picking up, but the arguing with insurance about over what they say you need and what you really need. Make it easy with OneDrop. They offer personalized test strip plans, plus you get a Bluetooth glucose meter, test strips, lancets, and your very own certified diabetes coach. Subscribe today to get test strips for less than $20 a month. Delivered right to your door. No prescription or copays required. One less thing to worry about. Not that surprising when you learn that the founder of OneDrop lives with type 1. They get it. OneDrop. Gorgeous gear, supplies delivered to your door. 24/7 access to your certified diabetes coach. Learn more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneDrop logo. My guest this week is an award-winning screenwriter. He is someone that I've never met, but I feel like I kind of know because for many years, I, and many of you, read about him in Kerri Sparling's blog, SixUntilMe. Kerri spent more than 14 years writing about her life with type 1 diabetes, which included meeting and marrying Chris, who was then featured in blog posts about kids and family and everything you would expect. Kerri has stepped back from the blog to pursue other projects in her own writing. And Chris has a big movie coming out this week as this episode airs, Greenland, which debuts on American streaming this week. Chris, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. I feel, as I said, I feel like I kind of know you. So I appreciate you kind of taking the leap and coming on not a movie or a writing podcast, but a diabetes podcast. So this should be really fun. What made you decide? I mean, you've been writing movies for an awfully long time. What made you decide to put diabetes in this?
It's something I've been wanting to do for a while. This movie presented a pretty unique opportunity for me to do it for a couple of reasons. One, the movie is, first of all, it's called Greenland, and it's about an incoming asteroid that's going to hit Earth or comet. It's going to hit Earth. It's this existential threat that everyone on Earth faces. So kind of by nature of that alone, there's a ticking clock built into the movie, right? It's just when this thing's going to hit. You're trying to get to the bunkers in Greenland, trying to get there safely and survive. And so on the macro level, there is that large ticking clock at play, but the movie itself is different than, say, Deep Impact or Armageddon in that it operates more on a personal level than those two movies do. It's not a movie checking in with what the government's doing to trying to blow up the asteroid or anything like that. It's really more like the movie The Impossible, if anyone listening ever saw that. It's a great movie. And it's all to do with seeing it through this one particular family's lens, how they're going to survive this cataclysm. So built into that, I wanted to have it's a more personal story. And I liked the idea of having a more personal ticking clock as well. And so the son in the movie has type 1. And now that's not to say the only reason why I gave him type 1 is to say, oh, that'll be a cool narrative device, is to add yet another ticking clock. But it also, quite honestly, it just, as I said at the beginning of this long-winded answer, is that it gave me, I've been wanting to do it for a while. Kerri and I have been together for a very long time. So I've seen type 1 up close and personal for a very long time. And, I think it's kind of, it's somewhat a misunderstood, if not even known condition by a lot of people. So it was, I'm kind of hesitant to use the word educate because I'm not really trying to do that, but maybe just shine a light on it a little bit. And, this was an opportunity to do that on a large screen or one at your house.
But I'm really curious, as you said, this isn't a movie where you're going to take time to actually do a formal education about type 1, just as I wouldn't expect a formal education about a comet hitting the Earth and, what would happen. But you do have to explain these things. And I'm curious, how do you work that in? I assume we'll see things like injections or a pump or something like that. But was it difficult to kind of write it into the fabric of the story without, hey, everybody, we're going to talk about diabetes now?
It was to a certain extent because, as you well know, it's diabetes, it sometimes can fly a bit under the radar. I recently, it was kind of bizarre to do it, but it was fun. I did an interview with Kerri. And so we were talking like you and I are talking now. And as I told her then, and I don't always know when she's low. I don't always know when she's high. Things are beeping and everything else. And sometimes she takes on certain characteristics when that's going on. And I do know, or if I see her swigging a bunch of juice or whatever. But sometimes I just don't know. And so to kind of to represent that on screen is difficult because if you try to go too far in one direction or the other, it may start to feel very false and forced and almost cartoonish. Mm-hmm. And I 100% didn't want to do that. But if you go too subtle with it, which diabetes can sometimes be a rather subtle condition, at times. And, if you do that, then it doesn't register for the audience at all. So to kind of dramatize that, what I did was I had the young boy in the movie who was type 1. I gave him a pump. And, to kind of develop a shorthand with the audience right out of the gate, there's a scene early on in the movie where Gerard Butler, who stars in the movie, he's seeing that basically he's been away. He and his wife have had marital problems and they're trying to work it out, he and his wife now. When he's coming back, he hasn't seen his son in a little while. And you see there's a nice tender scene between him and his son where he notices the insulin pump. And he says, basically it's something to the effect of like, do you like that better than the shots? And, just kind of getting it across to the audience, someone who may not be as familiar with it as you or I might be, where it's like, oh, okay, I get, I can understand that to a certain extent because I have a certain amount of knowledge about diabetes. So yeah, I mean, it's small things like that along the way. I have no doubt there will still be things that some people watching it won't fully kind of hook onto and they won't fully get. But at the same time, I think there might be elements of it that people watching might be like, oh, I had no idea. I had no idea that having diabetes would require something like that. Or even to say the immediacy and the importance of insulin. It kind of where I spoke earlier about this massive macro level existential threat that they're facing, but they still have to get to these bunkers in Greenland if they're going to survive. And there becomes a situation where the boy he needs his insulin because he gets separated from it. And it's like, well, yeah, the large scale goal here remains, but it's if we don't get you there safely. And again, I mean, just maybe maybe to a certain degree informing the audience who might not know that insulin is not just something like, yeah, you take it whenever I don't know. I don't even know what some people might think. Like you just take it once in a while or you take it as you feel like it, or I don't know, whatever the misconception might be.
Right. When you eat a cupcake, you need your insulin,
right,
something like that.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. I think if nothing else, maybe it'll not open people's eyes. That's actually the wrong expression. Maybe just kind of illuminate the topic a bit for some people.
Yeah. I've said in the beginning, and I'll probably say it a few times, I know very little about the industry, the movie industry, and what it takes to write a movie and produce and get. But I would imagine that, and you've done projects before where you've been involved in every step, right? You've written and then you've produced it or you've been more involved. But with this, you wrote it, is my understanding. And what happens after you kind of hand off your baby? Because the director can change things, right? The actors have to change things. I guess I'll ask it both ways. First, about the diabetes, did they get it right the way you had hoped? And then we can talk about the movie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first, even before diabetes, yes, that always happens. I mean, I've directed movies, I've produced movies, all of which have been ones that I've written. So, in those instances, I have obviously quite a bit of control over what the final movie is going to look like. In this instance, having just written it, and in other movies I've only written, there's always an understanding that when you hand it off, essentially, it depends on the project, quite honestly. I mean, sometimes just as the screenwriter, I am still very much involved with the production because the director and or the producer probably see the value of having the person who conceived it involved. But with this, I was involved, but not, say, like on a day-to-day level, that's for sure. But for the diabetes of it all, I was happy with it. And there were a couple days when I was on set and I just happened to be there one of the days they were shooting a scene in the grocery store. And the son's there shopping with his dad. And he's like, hey, can I get some juice? And the dad's like, yeah, sure, go get some. And I remember talking to the director. I was like, Rick, listen. I was like, my wife generally doesn't drink juice for fun. Again, I know she perfectly well. She'd be no problem. She could if she wanted to, but right. I became so, in a way, overprotective of getting it right. And it being portrayed right, because the last thing I wanted to do was to finally incorporate diabetes into a movie of mine and for it to end up being portrayed wrong. But in talking with Rick, he was like, no, it's cool. Because meanwhile, he had his friend on speed dial who was the parent of a child with type 1. And he's like, no, I talked to them. I've consulted with them over and over again. And they said they let their child have juice if they want it and everything else. And I was like, on an intellectual level, it made perfect sense to me. But I was kind of like, wait a minute, wait, hold on a second here. And I bumped, so to fully answer the question, I think the director, the producers, I think they did a really good job. I think people watching the movie, and will it be 100% right? I don't know. I mean, people might see it and say, hey, I don't know if I agree with that but everyone's situation and their approach is different. But I could say if you kind of widen the aperture a bit and take a look at it, I think it does. It handles it accurately for the most part.
I would have been like Gatorade Zero, and then he can get a thing of juice boxes for later.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like everyone's situation is different, right?
So let's talk about movies for a little bit. Was this your dream job? Was this something you always wanted to do? Right back to Chris in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And, I've talked about this before, but it's still striking to me. When Benny was little, you'd give your kid a bath almost every single day, or he'd go swimming all summer long. And I always noticed his fingertips. They were poked so much that they were full of these little holes. I mean, they just looked really awful, especially when they got wet. He was almost 16. I'm not looking at his hands very much anymore. But man, when we go to the endocrinologist and Dr. V looks at his fingertips, they are normal. We've been using the Dexcom for so long now. It was 7 years. And with every new iteration, we have done fewer and fewer finger sticks. The latest generation, the Dexcom G6, eliminates finger sticks for calibration and diabetes treatment decisions. Just thinking about doing the 10 finger sticks a day we used to do, chasing my toddler around, it makes me so glad that Dexcom has helped us come so far. It's an incredible tool. If your glucose alerts and readings from the G6 do not match your symptoms or expectations, use a blood glucose meter to make diabetes treatment decisions. Learn more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Now back to Chris, and he's talking about whether this is still his dream job. Does he still love working in the movies?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I started like eons ago. I started as an actor, and I lived in Los Angeles for several years doing that. And while I liked that, and sure, it would have been great to have ultimately done that, it wasn't really, it's a really, really tough racket trying to be doing the struggling actor thing. It's fine when you're really young doing it, but at a certain point, you just feel like, wow, I have like no agency. I have almost no control over my future. It's just really, really tough. So I just kind of felt I needed a little more control over my career. And so, so to be involved in this industry in any capacity was always my goal.
How does it work these days? I mean, people would say, well, you can write from anywhere, but I've got to imagine that the whole industry, if not moving slower, shut down. I mean, 2020 has been a mess for everybody, but from a filmmaking standpoint, how did this even get done? I guess we'll talk about Greenland, but in general, how are things getting made right now? I mean,
Greenland was all written, shot well before the pandemic. But at the same time, post-production, it got shut down for a while in post-production. So it didn't get completed until in the midst of the pandemic. and then as far as the release of it, yeah, I mean, it was supposed to be in theaters 2 or 3 different times, and then the date got pushed back. But separate from that, as 2020 has gone on, I've actually had 2 other movies shoot during the pandemic. I just had one that wrapped 2 days ago in Albuquerque. And so for me personally, I mean, it's been again, I mentioned earlier about I can't complain. People have like real, things, especially during 2020, people have had really awful things that they've kind of faced. I'm not going to complain about having a movie pushed back or not being able to visit set because of COVID. But yeah, I mean, it's been a bit of a bummer. That's, I'm still human. Like it was a bit of a bummer to have 2 movies that, I wrote and produced. And I was basically producing from, one was in Ontario. There's a movie called Lakewood that I did with Naomi Watts. And then a movie that I just did, the one in Albuquerque, that wrapped 2 days ago. And it's like I was watching real-time feeds from the camera in my house, in my home office. And my situation, I'm being very protective, in particular of Kerri, having type 1. And so we're very, very locked down here in the COVID of it all. And so me going to set, me being on set just wasn't really an option for me. So
that's interesting, though. I had no idea that, things, I guess we've seen TV shows, we've seen things being filmed a little bit here and there, but it didn't occur to me that full-scale production or partial-scale production, because you were in your house looking at things, was going on. I don't even know what to ask. Are they putting their masks on until they jump in front of the camera? Is it locked down? Yeah. Is it just a free for all?
No, definitely not. No, it is. I mean, I really wish, for other industries that are still out there and people are working, maybe it's just not feasible, but the film industry, to its credit, and television industry, they really have some great protocols in place. I mean, there are zones that are, I'm not going to get into all of it, but sure. There are really, really strict measures. I mean, because again, there are a lot of unions involved too. There's Screen Actors Guild, Writers Guild, Directors Guild, Producers Guild. So they're very protective of their membership for in the first place. And there's regular testing and everything else. And again, that's a luxury. Not a lot of people have that. And then it depends on the size of the production. I mean, if you're talking about a big, let's say, Marvel movie, I mean, you could, in that instance, they're going to probably create a massive bubble where everyone, they rent out an entire hotel, or like they do in Mission Impossible, where they literally rented out an entire cruise ship and just everyone lived on the cruise ship off the coast of Norway while they were shooting there. So that wasn't us. we definitely were just like that.
But that makes sense if you can afford it.
Yeah, right? But if you can afford it, yeah. I mean, budget plays a big role, but it's really, really difficult, as it should be, because there are people at risk. And yeah, the actors in particular, because, when you're rolling the cameras, you can't have masks on anymore. So you have to be really, really strict in how you go about your productions.
What do you think is going to happen with entertainment in the next few years? I was having this conversation with a friend in terms of, are we going to see COVID and people in masks and kind of that real life reflection in the next couple of years in sitcoms where people are trying to reflect back to us what we've been through this year? Or do you think we just need a couple of years away from it before we can start seeing it?
It's interesting. I've had that exact conversation with a lot of people where, is it going to be in stories? Is it going to be that you pretend COVID just never happened? Or do you incorporate it, even if it's not just a major part of your story? It's just an element of life that everyone is familiar with it. So it's not, if you just mention, someone got sick during COVID a couple of years ago, you just offhanded say it, and there's no explanation because everyone in the world is going to know what that is. So it's either, and I'm of the mind where when we're out of this, I want to be out. I don't want to look back on this and try to make it, certainly don't want to make it part of us. I mean, people are right now, you see people trying to make pandemic movies and everything else. And I'm like, I want no part of that. I want no part of that at all. And that's fine. I'm not judging them for maybe wanting to. I'm just saying for myself, I'm hopefully looking to the future here and want to get past this and move on.
I'm with you. I think we'll know for sure if a rom-com next Christmas makes money and they're able to do a meet cute with COVID or some mask. They're like, if that takes off, then we'll know, but I don't think it's going to.
Yeah. And I know I my wife watches This Is Us, and, I saw a couple times where they're wearing masks on the show. So they're addressing it now, and that's fine. I mean, I'm not judging, and I'm just saying for myself. But
I'm with you. I want to be entertained right now. I'm not. Maybe as we get past it, we can reflect more, but I think it'll be interesting to see, because there are different opinions about it for sure. Looking back to Greenland, I wanted to ask you, so why did you give diabetes to the kid in the movie and not the wife character? Was there a thought process there?
It's tough to say. I mean, don't really recall. I mean, I probably wrote this movie by now, maybe 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know. if I decided at this moment I'm going to make a movie and give a character in a family with diabetes, would I make? I don't know. I mean, maybe again, just kind of speaking to this. Again, I'm hesitant saying opportunity. It makes it seem like I was on a crusade, and I'm not on any crusade at all. But like, I think there are a lot of people. I'm going to be frank. I don't think a lot of people know that kids can get diabetes. I just don't think that. I think a lot of people. I think when they just hear the term diabetes, I think they mean they just assume it means type 2. They don't even think that there is a type 1 or type 2. They just think there is diabetes. And to maybe see a child, a 7-8-year-old child with diabetes, maybe that kind of will at least, I don't know, in a way stop someone long enough to say, well, wait a minute, I never knew that little kids can have diabetes, for example.
I mentioned in the intro to this interview that, I kind of knew of you and knew you a little bit from Kerri's blog. My son was diagnosed 14 years ago, so she'd been writing the blog for a while when he was diagnosed, and it was one of the first things I found. And like many people, because it's a very, very popular blog, I read everything she wrote. I feel like I knew so much about Kerri, and it was a huge help to me, even though I have a son and, it's not my spouse who has type 1. What was that like for you? Was that like a different world, kind of like, okay, Kerri's writing her blog, but you were mentioned in it. We knew about your family. We knew about things that were going on. I'm curious what your perspective on SixUntilMe is.
I mean, I've always tried to be as supportive as I could with everything that she's doing in the community and elsewhere. And on the blog, yeah, that was no different. I think it speaks more to just how the internet itself has changed overall, where, I mean, she started blogging when people didn't even, I want to say she was one of maybe 2 or 3 bloggers who were blogging about diabetes at the time. And this was, that's at a time when the internet, blogs were pretty new and people weren't generally sharing, they weren't comfortable sharing personal information online so much. And nowadays that's all the internet is. And so so it was kind of a different space. And it was a much more, it wasn't the juggernaut it is now. I don't mean her blog. I mean, just like any kind of blog or just social media account or anything else like that. So her writing personal details about, say, our relationship, and then our, ultimately our marriage, and then our daughter at first. It just seemed we were okay with it for a while. And then just, again, speaking for us, this is no comment on anyone else who might be doing this now currently, but it's just for us. We just kind of decided that, just wanted to be a little more closed off with the personal stuff in that way. So that's why if you go back, I'm sure in her blog, maybe when you started, I mean, I remember a lot of stuff. She would talk about the stuff she and I were doing as kind of like a young couple going into New York City and hanging out and blah, blah, blah. And, so because it was just kind of fun and had almost almost had like an early Facebook feel where you just felt like, hey, I'm writing this to my friends and family.
Right.
As opposed to, you write this stuff and then all of a sudden it's just, it's fodder for anyone to comment on or anything. I don't know. And it just became, I don't know if it was a conscious decision or not. It just became more of like just to kind of pull back a little bit in that way on her blog and stuff. Yeah.
For me, it was almost like a teachable thing in terms of not just diabetes and learning about what an adult perspective was, which really did help me a lot gain perspective, even though my son was 2. It was also a really good kind of template almost in terms of sharing, because it did educate a lot of us along the way, because that was before Facebook and social media, really. I mean, you're probably young enough that you had Facebook in college and that was it. But I mean, in 2006, when I think she started 2005, there was no social media really. So, it was a really good lesson in protecting your privacy, especially as it went on. But, it's a different world. People can't share enough, some people. So listen, Greenland has been released, I believe, in Europe and some other parts of the world, because that's I've seen it in some of the parenting Facebook groups. People have been chit-chatting about
great.
it. Yeah. I asked if anybody had any questions for you, and most people just said, I loved it, but it scared me, or like, oh my gosh, I didn't want to think about those kinds of things. But I did get a great comment from Sarah, who said, Stacey, can you tell Chris how much my 9-year-old son and I appreciated how accurate it was? She has a question for you. She wants to know how difficult it was for you emotionally to write something like this with so much personal experience from this disease. Now, you've said it's been about 4 years or maybe more since you actually wrote the script, but seeing as this really is something scary in terms of end of the world, and like a lot of parents, I have like, oh my gosh, if he's stranded, or, it's even just like, it could be forgetting his diabetes bag at the movies. It doesn't have to be a comet hitting the earth or a plane crash or something terrible. Yeah. We were all scared. Did you get emotional kind of writing this and thinking about Kerri?
Yeah. I mean, it's emotional now, even watching it again for that reason. I think there's another, and this is kind of what I was driving at with incorporating diabetes, where again, I didn't want it to seem like just some plot device. Like you said, it doesn't have to be a comet hitting the Earth. It doesn't have to be a pandemic that we're all dealing with. But those things, there's another whole layer for people living with diabetes, or any chronic condition for that matter, any medical condition for that matter. There is another ongoing, in a way, unrelenting element to your life and to the life of the people who care about you. And that's, I think, what I wanted to really portray, is that it's like, again, even though these people are selected, and that's, I'm not giving away much, they are among the very, very few people selected to go to these bunkers in Greenland. Someone made the joke recently. It's like, Gerard Butler has saved the president so many times. It's only fair that he was selected. But anyway, so they were, and it's like, okay, that's great. But like, nothing changes it for, at least as of current standards of medicine, nothing changes the fact that this kid still needs his insulin. And it was emotional in that way because we've been there, we've been in those instances. And I'm sure so many people listening have, where sometimes stuff can get scary. I talked about the subtlety of it before, and sometimes things can go from subtle or 0 to 60 pretty fast. And that by itself, those moments are emotional when they're happening. And so to try to incorporate them into even something fake, you try your best to just make it feel, real and realistic, and kind of pour yourself into it as much as you can. So yeah, it was, so yes, Sarah.
I promise I will not get too nosy and ask you lots of personal questions about Kerri. But I am curious. I don't talk to a lot of partners and spouses of people with type 1 diabetes. And that's a different experience than being a parent or being a person with type 1. I'm not going to ask you to make a grand statement, what have you learned or what advice do you have? But I'm curious, when you met Kerri, and this is a long time ago, as you said, I don't know if you can remember, what did you think about diabetes at the time? Were you really worried about dating and then getting very serious with someone who had something like this? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. I had a very limited exposure to type 1, only because a good buddy of mine, he had been for a little while dating a girl with type 1 prior to me meeting Kerri. And the standout thing was that she was low one time and she threw a pumpkin at him. That was my introduction to type 1 diabetes, that sometimes when you're low, like you can kind of like your behavior can be, not like, I don't know, something can come out of you, like, depending. And she just happened to get like very aggressive for some reason. And I was like, wow. So that was my completely rough and probably ill-informed introduction to diabetes. And then I met Kerri, and, thankfully she never threw a pumpkin at me.
That's hysterical.
But yeah, I learned it a lot from just being with her and being around her and see how she manages the disease. But the thing is that I met her, she must have had it for about 18 years, 15 years, anywhere from like 15 to 18, 19, whatever it was, before I met her. So she was very accustomed, to dealing with this as an adult, because naturally she got it as a child. And then, I shouldn't say naturally, she got it as a child. So naturally her mom and her dad were helping her as a child, but then I met her as an adult. So she has several years of managing this disease on her own. And so it was kind of like I had to, again, this is just specific to my relationship with Kerri. I'm not trying to, map this onto how other people might do their thing. But like, I learned the boundaries in a way of like, what is the best way for me to be helpful in these situations? And even something simple, like I learned very early, and to this day know that if Kerri's low, you have an instinct when someone's not feeling well for any reason, you're like, oh, just sit down. If you're feeling dizzy or whatever, she's the opposite. And again, this is just her. She's the opposite. She doesn't want to. She doesn't want to sit down, because sitting down in a way mentally allows it to settle in more for her. She can't fully explain, but you know what I'm saying? It's more of me like, I can't resist it if I'm accepting it. And that, again, it's not some woo-woo thing. It's just for her. So like little things like that over the years, I've and then bigger things over the years that I've come to say, all right, well, this is my role in this, I guess.
Getting back to screenwriting for just a moment, there's I think a lot of people think that any job in the movies is super glamorous, and it's not as difficult as it is. Screenwriting has to be so difficult to me to think about, because, you're pretty much by yourself writing. But I'm curious, do you have any advice? For anybody listening who would love to do what you were doing?
Yeah. Read screenplays. It's the best education you could possibly get. There are entire screenwriting programs you could go spend a couple $100,000 on right now. And I'm not taking away the value of that. But at the same time, I would put it right up there with just reading a screenplay a week.
How do you get a screenplay? Pardon my ignorance.
No, it's fine. I mean, just go online. Just go to Google and type movie screenplays, and I'm sure like the vast majority of movies you've seen and like are you can read the screenplays for.
Huh. Is it still fun for you?
Yes. I've been doing this for, let's say, professionally for over 10 years now. It's been my job. Just like anything else, things start to get a little old. I think for the next 10 years, I think I look forward more to writing and directing more as opposed to just writing. I've directed a couple of movies so far, but I want to do more of that. I think in the next 10 years, we'll say. Yeah, I mean, I still love it. I love what I do. I feel very fortunate that I tried for a very long time to break into this industry. And so like, I never lose sight of that. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly days that it's just not happening. You're just trying and you're like, wow, I'm really awful at this. And so, and other days you're kind of like, yeah, maybe I'm not half bad. I think it's interesting in the COVID of it all. Like I remember especially, early on in it where everyone was on lockdown and everyone's like, oh, you must be getting so much done. You must be getting so much writing done, having all this time. And I was like, I ain't getting nothing done. I'm like, I can't get my head in the game at all. Yeah. And that went on for a while. Like creatively, I just couldn't get there. I guess understandably, given the circumstance. But over time, it's gotten easier. I think more than anything now, it's just a time thing. I'm sure Kerri would agree with this, is that because of how we're doing things with us and our kids being, home from school, and that's just how we're doing it. It's just, there's a lot of us being here and having to kind of shuffle responsibilities back and forth. And so, the amount of time I actually have and that she has to get work done that's a pretty valuable commodity these days. So
yeah, no doubt. So before I let you go, is there anything that you can share with us that you're working on now in terms of writing or things that haven't started yet?
Yeah. Let me see.
You can tell us.
I have a long gestating project. Basically, it's an adaptation of Stephen King's The Talisman. I don't know if that one's ever going to happen, quite honestly. It's just, it's something that it's Steven, not a name drop, but it's a Steven Spielberg project that he has been trying to do for like 35 years.
Wow. And
there have been like, I don't know how many iterations of it that just kind of come together. Then he changes his mind or it doesn't happen. And then he moves on and then tries again in like 5-10 years later. So who knows if this one will follow that same trajectory, but that's one that I've been working on for a while. And then a couple other projects. And then I just started a new script of my own. So in other words, not like writing a script or adapting a script for somebody else.
Right.
It's one that I'm hoping is going to be my next directing project. So yeah.
Okay. So we will look for Greenland. I will put all the information in the show notes where people can find it. Anything that we should look for that might be like a diabetes community in thing? Now I have to look for the juice in the grocery store.
Yeah, there's that scene. There's the pump scene. There's the scene where, there's a lot of them. It's not like some small facet of the movie. It's
oh cool. The mom isn't trying to read SixUntilMe, like the mom's not going through his past.
No, there's no Easter egg thrown in of like a SixUntilMe Easter egg, right? It's interesting though, because the maybe I'll leave you with this. Kerri asked me this question when she was interviewing me, which was kind of bizarre. She was like, well, why she's like, I'm curious. In the movie, the boy's wearing an old like Medtronic pump. And she's like, why that old pump? Why not like a more modern pump, even more modern Medtronic pump? And I don't know. Quite honestly, it's probably the props department that chose that one and the director approved it. And then there are also clearance issues where you can't just use a product.
Right.
You have to get approval from the company. And so I could find out, I'm sure. But still, what I do wonder, and I might have done the same thing had I directed the movie, is that old model, those older model pumps look more medical. They look like medical devices, where a lot of them more modern pumps will say, they look sleek. They look like cell phones. They look like, and so I think for an audience, if the part of the effort here is to kind of maybe shine a light on this condition, on this disease, you certainly don't want them to be confused where they see something like, well, what is that? I don't know. Is that a phone or what is that? And I think, I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's a fun fact. I don't know how you'd classify what I just told you, but
no, that's exactly what I meant. That's so interesting because when we look at the screen now, we're all going to be thinking like, wait a minute, because I know my audience, they're going to pause it. They're going to look at it. They're going to zoom in if they can. And what pump is that? And that's a really good reason why.
The thing is, it's not even a fun fact because I don't know if that's the reason why.
Right.
It's like a fun speculation. There you go.
Well, we're bonkers that way. We like to know all that stuff. So we'll see what happens. Chris, thank you so much for joining me and, for speculating and for sharing so much of your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
More information about the movie, the trailer, where you can watch it, all of that at the episode homepage at diabetes-connections.com. Wherever you are listening, if you're listening on a podcast app, you can always come back to the homepage and find out all of the info. Not every app has a great way to see the show notes. We're on Pandora and Spotify and Apple, and everyone's just slightly different. So I like to keep it at a home base. We also have transcriptions for every episode this year, and we are starting to go back and add them for every episode. So I'm very excited about that. I will also link up the Kerri and Chris interview that he mentioned, because Kerri scooped me. She got the interview first. It was really fun. I've interviewed my husband before for this show, and it's a little bit of a weird feeling, but it was a lot of fun to watch them. And I recommend that, especially if you're a big fan like I am of SixUntilMe and of Kerri. Up next, we're going to talk about this new at-home test kit from JDRF. First, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Gvoke HypoPen. Almost everyone who takes insulin has experienced a low blood sugar, and that can be scary. A very low blood sugar is really scary, and that's where Gvoke HypoPen comes in. It's the first auto-injector to treat very low blood sugar. Gvoke HypoPen is pre-mixed and ready to go with no visible needle. That means it's easy to use. In usability studies, 99% of people were able to give Gvoke correctly. I'm so glad to have something new. Find out more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Gvoke logo. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with pheochromocytoma or insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk. In Innovations this week, where we talk about the latest and greatest in the technology sectors and new stuff in our community, I want to tell you about JDRF's new T1Detect. This just came out last week as you're listening to this episode, if you're listening to it when it first airs. And T1Detect is JDRF's new screening, education, and awareness program. So basically, it's screening you for type 1 diabetes autoantibodies. I'm going to read a little bit from the JDRF website. They say, until now, T1D symptoms and a diagnosis often come out of the blue. Today, families can use testing to detect T1D early so they can plan and prepare. With one blood test, anyone at any age can find out before symptoms even occur if they are at risk for developing T1D. The test is easy, simple, and can help save lives. So this sounds great. This sounds a lot like TrialNet, who we've talked to before. My understanding is that it's different. It's not quite the extensive test. And by that, I mean, it looks like a different test. It's a finger prick, and you send the blood samples back to the lab, and then you get your results back, and they say you get next steps as to what they mean and what to do. So I'm hoping that that also means counseling, although I haven't seen anything about that yet, because, that's one thing about doing these tests, any health tests by mail, right? You want to get the results, and then you want to have somebody sitting next to you telling you what you do with those results. So you're not feeling alone. What if you have these antibodies and you don't know what they mean? You know what I mean. When you click through the website, it actually takes you to Enable Biosciences T1D autoantibody testing, and that's from whom you actually order the kit. You make an account with the company. You can check through your options on privacy. You can decide if you want to make your results available to JDRF. You can say, do I want Biosciences to have my personal health information? There's a lot you can do here. The tests are not free, is my understanding, but I didn't see anything about cost anywhere on the website. However, I didn't get far enough through it to actually order the tests. And what's interesting here is that T1Detect will be available to people whether or not they have a family member who has type 1 diabetes. And that's different from most of the other screenings, including TrialNet. So a lot of questions here. I have reached out to JDRF. They have said that they are, more than willing to come on. So now it's just a question of scheduling. So I'll be putting in the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group, when we are ready to go with that. And I will certainly solicit your questions and we will get them answered. My biggest question is, why make this separate? JDRF, I believe, already helps fund TrialNet. So why now fund something different when TrialNet needs money? So I'm going to find out. I'm sure we'll learn much more. I am definitely in favor of more research and more testing because, boy, if we could test everybody for type 1, we could learn so much more about possible prevention and treatment and all that good stuff. So Don't misunderstand my questions here for doubt or cynicism. I'm just really curious about this new program, and of course, we will find out more. Programming note for the rest of the year. I'll be honest, I'm not really sure. We have about 2 weeks left to go for 2020, and I do have the shows planned out. We're going to do Wait, Wait, Don't Poke Me, the game show that I aired at Friends for Life. If you didn't go to that winter conference, you'll be able to hear the show, and you'll actually be able to watch it. I'll put it on YouTube the same time the podcast goes live. That's always a lot of fun. And then I have another panel that we taped earlier this year about the Type 1 and Type 2 community with some familiar faces to many of you. And that will be the last episode of 2020. However, as I've said before, there's always some interesting stuff at the end of the year. And if we're able to jump in with some more breaking news or something really interesting comes up, it's not like I'm traveling this year. We're all sitting around on Zoom. So we will bring you, any breaking news that happens in our community. And I basically just reserve the right to throw a new show in here or there. But we are almost done. Holy cow, this year. I'm not much for reflection. I'm not quite sure that I'll do a lot on 2020. I think I need to get a little further away from it and further toward good stuff and being with you, all of you, more in person before I can really properly reflect. But I got to tell you, I am glad to see 2021 on the horizon. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. And thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Simms. I'll see you back here next week. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Simms Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.